Hi, welcome to another online class for STIW 2044 mobile programming. Today I would like to talk more on Fragment, since this is quite difficult for the student to understand. So basically what we need to understand, what we need to be clear of, is that a fragment is part of activity. So here I have this simple fragment example that describe how fragment is being used. So as you can see here, this is one activity from the application. There are two buttons here, and these two buttons will load two fragments. So under this activity, there are one layout. There's a frame layout here. Okay, this is frame layout, and this edit text view and button basically in an activity. So when I press this button, it will basically show this activity, this fragment layout, and if I press the second button here, it shows on the second fragment, but it still remain in the same activity. So let me show how simple it is to develop this application. Alright, so always start with layout. So I started with activity main. So this is my activity main. So as you can see here, the parent layout is a linear layout, so I use this for simplicity. And then inside linear layout, there are another sub layout, linear layout horizontal. So this hosted two buttons, button 1 and button 2. So the purpose of these two buttons basically just to call and load the fragment into this frame layout. And the third component here is the content frame layout, which you can just get from here. Okay, this is frame layout, or you can use any other frame that you would like to use. So I use frame layout in this example. So basically it's quite simple. So you can see the ID clearly here, button 1, button 2, and content frame call the ID for frame layout. Just as simple as that. For the alright, so the main activity here, just a simple layout. So as I mentioned before, there's only two buttons and one frame layout that will basically host the fragment that we're going to declare, we're going to use later. Alright, there are two fragments that I'm going to introduce for this project. The first fragment is a fragment first.xml. So just a simple fragment. There's a one text view and one button here, and this is button 3. And the second one is a fragment second, and with also one text view and one button called button 4. Alright, so those are the requirement for the graphical user interface. So whatever that design interface that you would like to have in this layout, you can do it inside here. Alright, next we need two classes that basically going to handle for both fragment. So fragment first, described by first fragment. So just a simple class, first fragment, which extend fragment, and we have the constructor and two override method. So these two override methods is very important method. So one is on create view method, which inflate the fragment first layout into the main activity main layout. And the second override method is on activity created. This is where interaction with the buttons or with the view or any component that we have in the fragment is being located. For example, here, so we have one button, declare this one button, and get activity. So since we use the fragment, so we need to use get activity, find view by ID and the button ID. So this button ID referring to the fragment first. This is button 3, and this is a set on click listener. Okay, so just a simple toast and hello fragment 1. For the second fragment, also the same. Okay, so the only changes is that to the fragment second inflator. So we inflate for the second fragment, and the second fragment will inflate into the frame layout that available in the main activity. Alright, so how do we inflate, how do we display the layout in the activity main? So this is where we need main activity. So as I mentioned before, there's only 2 buttons in the main activity, and the first button we load the first fragment, the second button load the second fragment. So the first button here, this is button 1, and implement the set on click listener, and inside here there's a fragment, first fragment, and refers to the first fragment that has been described in this class. So make sure that when you import fragment, import app.fragment, and then fragment manager begin transaction, replace. You're going to replace with the content frame with the fragment. Okay, the content frame with the fragment, and commit, and done. And it goes the same with the button 2. So when we press button 2, it changes to the second fragment, and fragment manager will begin transaction and replace the content frame with second fragment, and finally commit with the changes. So you can see now the idea is that the activity main content frame, which is frame layout, is being replaced or is being inflated with fragment first or fragment second XML. So those are the basic idea that you need to get, you need to understand when dealing with fragment. So fragment is basically it allow for the main activity to host it multiple layout, so you can change dynamically the graphical user interface using fragment. So as you can see in the manifest, there are no definition of activity. There's only one main activity in the manifest, and inside the main activity we inflated the fragment depend on which fragment that you like to have in your layout. So the example here shows when I press fragment 1, it display fragment 1. Right, so when you press this button, this is the interaction. So you'll, if you like to do any button or any component interaction or any view interaction within each fragment, so for example here button 3, so you need to refer to the class that handle that fragment. So you need to put it into on activity created. Okay, so the reference to the component, you need to use get activity. Okay, so that you can reverse this button, find view ID, r.id the button 3, or you can just refer a button as private in this class. Alright, so those are the concept, the very basic concept of fragment. Very easy to understand, very clear to understand. And also one more thing, make sure also that you import the correct fragment. And sometimes when you try to import fragment, whenever fragment is being imported into the class, we mistakenly use a different fragment. You need to make sure that you use the correct fragment class for the project. You need to make sure that it is basically the same fragment class that you are dealing with, or else you're going to get error from a different class or from main activity that call the fragment, because it belongs to a different class implementation. Alright, so I hope that will be that is going to help you a lot for understanding fragment. It is quite difficult to understand at first, but that is basically how fragment works as a basic understanding. So of course there are more than meets the eye. There's a lot of other fragment operation that you can use you can implement, but these are the basic implementation for fragment. It's very easy and should sufficient enough for you to understand how it works. Alright, thank you.